Well, good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday night Torah class. My name is Jerry Watkins, and this is Living Messiah. And we've been studying the Torah on Tuesday evenings from 7 till 8:30 for many years now. Due to the current pandemic, we're no longer allowed to have people present, so I'm just doing it on video so that you can watch it live at home or later on a replay thing. So let me open with a word of prayer. Father God, just thank you for loving us. Thank you for these trying times that we're going through. And we know that they're designed, among other things, to get our attention. And so I would just ask, Father God, that you would get the attention of those that need to hear from you. I just thank you. Thank you that we can rely on you to see us through these times. And I thank you that we live in a nation full of good people, basically, and that we're going to get through all this together. I thank you for your Torah, and I thank you for the evening, and I thank you for the discussion that we would have had we had people here. Just help me say all the things that you want me to say, and help it to be received properly. In Yeshua's name, amen. I wanted to talk a little bit about the schedule. Last Tuesday night, was Rosh Chodesh, I think is what they call that. Well, I'm sure it's what they call that. Head of the month, if you will. It was the first day of the first month after the spring equinox. So it was the first of Nisan, or the first of Abib in the way the months were first named. Tonight, then, is, let's see, what is tonight? I forgot. Yeah, no, I was saying, okay. It's about I don't know. It's about the 7th of Nisan. And the reason I'm saying that is because a week from tonight is Passover. A week from tonight is the 14th going into the 15th of Nisan, which is Passover. The Pesach meal is on that evening, Tuesday evening. And we won't be having this broadcast on that Tuesday because you should be celebrating Passover in your home. And furthermore, tonight we're going to finish the book of Deuteronomy. And since it's the last book of the Torah, we'll be finishing the Torah, and I want to talk about that a little while. But we'll take a break. So since we're not going to do the Torah class next Tuesday, keep looking at our website. We might take off as much as the next 3 weeks, but we might not. Look at the website, and anything that's planned for the Tuesdays in this time slot for the next few weeks will be on there. And we plan to start again after things kind of get back to some degree of normal, if you will. Let's see. This Friday, it turns out, is the day historically where the people went out and chose the lamb that they were going to sacrifice for Passover. It corresponds to the entry of Yeshua into Jerusalem on the donkey. I think they call that Palm Sunday because that particular year, I guess, it fell on a Sunday. Anyway, I think that's interesting, something that we should note. I guess one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out is God does things on his appointed days. And so it would be smart for us to kind of be anticipating something happening here on Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because this is one of the most important holidays that God, feast days, appointed times that God has ordained. Let's see. I have a whole bunch of little nits like that I want to get out of the way before we start, and I think I'm okay. So I think I'm ready to go on. So one of the things I do is I like to review where we are and what we did last week. So here's our map of just the central part of Israel. And let's see here. Let me make sure I can get my thing here. This is the north end of the Dead Sea there. Here's the plains of Moab right there. And that's where the Israelites are currently camped out. That's up a little bit. This gray area here is below sea level, quite a ways below sea level. And they're up a little bit, and they can look over and they can see Jericho. Jericho is the first town they come to in the book of Joshua, which is the book after Deuteronomy. So that's where they're all located. So I like to talk about that. Here's let's see here, do that, go up and do this. The Sea of Galilee, in Hebrew it's called Kinneret, and as you can see, it's almost 700 feet below sea level. I think the fact that these bodies of water are below sea level is very interesting. It's interesting to me. It's kind of like a disaster waiting to happen. All things being equal, someday that's going to fill up with water so that the sea level will be the same all over the earth. But it's not right now. Anyway, one final thing is over here, right here, is Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo is 2,600 feet above sea level. So the distance between Mount Nebo and the Dead Sea is like almost 4,000 feet. And if you're up on Mount Nebo, I'll have a picture here in a while, you can see to the west all kinds of interesting things, and we'll talk about that. But that's going to factor into what we're reading tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and act like people are here, and that says, are there any questions, anything you'd like to talk about? Otherwise, we'll go back and kind of look at what we talked about last night, or last week. Yes.
I have no questions.
We have one guy here that's managing the website, and if you had a question, he will get it. John. Anyway, last week we were into Deuteronomy 31, and I wanted to go back and look at some of the last things we read in Deuteronomy 31. Deuteronomy 31 was where Moses was, I think is kind of the climax of the book of Deuteronomy, because he was pleading with the Israelites to be diligent and obey the commands of God so that it could go well with them. And then at the end of chapter 31, God goes to Moses and he tells him this, reading from verse 16 on. He says, "And Yahweh said to Moses, you are going to rest with your ancestors, and these people will soon prostitute themselves to the foreign gods of the land they are entering. They will forsake me and break the covenant that I made with them. And in that day I will become angry with them and forsake them. I will hide my face from them, and they will be destroyed. Many disasters and calamities will come on them, and in that day they will ask, have not these disasters come on us because our God is not with us? And I will certainly hide my face in that day because of all their wickedness in turning to other gods." So the whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses just pleading with them. If you'll just obey the commands, if you'll just keep God's covenant, everything will go great. And he talked about how great it would go. And if you don't, it's going to go terribly. And most of chapter 31 is about how bad it could go. Chapter 30 as well. Just all horrible kinds of, some is hard to read. And then he comes here at the end of chapter 31 and says they're going to do it. It's really kind of a shame, and that's why we got into the discussion last week about the seeming apparent contradiction between predestination and free will. God is clearly telling the people, the Israelites, that they have the ability to be blessed beyond measure and to avoid the disastrous consequences of being disobedient. But then he also goes right on and says they're going to do it anyway. And so he knows what they're going to do, even though they had the choice, they had the freedom not to do it. And it's one of these apparent contradictions that you just have to accept, because God, well, the way I used to put it is God's God and you're not. We won't understand that till we get with him. We're there with him in eternity. Anyway, I think it's kind of instructive to think sometimes, what would have happened if the Israelites had tried and decided that, oh man, we've got to do this no matter what, we've got to keep the covenant, and then done a better job at it. You can argue they did kind of a job with it. We're going to talk more about this in detail. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Anyway, he goes on in verse 19 of chapter 31, and he says, God's talking to Moses, and he says, "Now write down this song and teach it to the Israelites and have them sing it. so that it may be a witness for me against them. Okay, a song. Chapter 32 of Deuteronomy is called the Song of Moses. And God dictated this song to Moses, and Moses is supposed to write it down and teach it. He's going to teach it to the Israelites, and it says, so that it may be a witness for me against them. So I think it might be a good idea to at least think for a minute, why on earth would God put such a thing in a song? And there's several good reasons. One thing is we need to remember, and it's constantly good to think about this, is that these events were happening in the neighborhood of 3,500 years ago, 3,500 years ago. That's 1,000 years before Yeshua and 500 years before that. It's before the nation Israel was, obviously, because they're just talking about going into it. So it's a long time. Books weren't common. They used to have scrolls, but scrolls were very uncommon. So if you were going to pass down history from generation to generation, the best way to do it was by word of mouth. And so they would practice things. They would memorize. They memorized genealogies, for example. They know who was married to whom all the way back, essentially all the way back to Adam and Eve. And they would recite this as they were learning as youth. So a song is a useful learning tool, useful memorization tool. You could memorize this song, and then as you pass it down to your kids would be able to remember why we learned it and what it means. John?
Just to be clear, if I'm understanding this correctly, this in 31 is talking about the song.
Yes.
The actual song is in the next chapter.
Yeah, and we're going to go through it.
Okay.
We got like the next 8 slides to go through this song and talk about it and what God's going to do with it, or what his purpose is. But I just think it was I asked myself when I read this the first time, why on earth is he teaching them a song? And not only that, it's not a happy song. It's a song that's going to be a witness for me against them. In other words, he says, teach them the song so that when this stuff happens, they can come back and look at it and understand why it happened to them. That's what this is. So, let's go. If there are no questions, I think this is kind of an interesting topic. If there are no questions, and I can see that there aren't, we'll go ahead and start looking at the song. So it's pretty much all of chapter 32. And Moses recited the words of this song from beginning to end in the hearing of the whole assembly of Israel. Listen, you heavens, and I will speak. Hear, you earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching fall like rain, and my words descend like dew, like showers on new grass, like abundant rain on tender plants. I will proclaim the name of Yahweh. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. They are corrupt and not his children. To their shame, they are a warped and crooked generation. Is this the way you repay Yahweh, you foolish and unwise people? Is he not your father, your creator, who made you and formed you? So, not a lot to talk about right there. Let's move on. But he's basically, this is definitely a somber song, right? There's not much happiness so far. And he goes on in verse 7, remember the days of old and consider the generations of long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, and they will explain to you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel. For Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted inheritance. In the desert land he found him, in a barren and howling waste. He shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young, that spreads its wings to catch them and carries them aloft. So let's stop and consider that for a couple of minutes. First of all, question? Yeah, question from this vast audience.
If I can go back, I'm sorry I'm a little bit late here
Okay.
on my thought, but about, you said it was a song, you do a song to remember things, to remember what the content of the song.
Yes.
And you said it was a negative thing, it was a bad thing.
Well,
I would say it, I'm not disagreeing with that, but I would want to remember that bad part to warn those who are trying to convince Israel to go off in a path that's not in alignment with Torah, that it's a warning. Hey, don't you remember the song? This is what happens in the song.
Yes.
In fact, didn't Moses prophesy that these things were happening?
Yeah.
Don't do this.
yes, yeah, exactly.
So everybody will know what you're talking about because they know the song.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And I thought the idea here in verse 7 where it says, ask your father and he'll tell you, and your elders and they will explain it to you. Embedded in that statement is that your elders and your fathers are supposed to pass this song down, and you're supposed to pass it down to your kids so that as time goes on, the record that God is making here will remain intact. And he said this is a witness. Go ahead, John.
Well, this is like the Passover, the 4 questions. Why do we do these things?
Exactly. The point I wanted to drive home here was that from God's perspective, he knew this was going to take generations. I mean, in our case, here we are sitting 3,500 years later and looking at that song. That's nothing short of miraculous. That's amazing that we're looking at the song, we understand what it meant and why he did it, and it's still here. You know, to say his word stands is kind of like the understatement of the year. John.
From Paul.
Okay.
He says, reminds him of Isaiah 55:11. The verse is at the beginning of chapter 32. I'll go look at 55:11, and you go do what you want to do.
I'll if I go look at something like that, I'll.
No, I will.
Okay, all right, fine. I'll go on about what else I was going to talk about. Down here in verse 10, it says, in a desert land he found him, in a barren and howling waste. He shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. Who's he talking about? Oh, boy, I wish people were here, because I get someone to raise their hand. Well, it says right in the sentence above it, verse 9, it says, for Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance. So the he is Jacob. Jacob is Israel. He's the father of Israel, changed his name. God changed his name to Israel. So in the desert he found him, in a barren and howling waste. He shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. Does that describe any kind of a situation that we've read about in the Torah previously? Let me go back what John has here.
That's the eagle's wings? No?
Well, the eagle's wings all right, but I was thinking previously in Torah. I was just wondering if that...
Well, eagle's wings was right. Like I'm thinking Exodus 19.
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking.
That's fine, yeah.
I don't know if that's similar
That
in the
was
same
not
place.
what I was pushing toward, but
what were you thinking?
That one fits, and I wouldn't discount it. But the one I was thinking of is when... It's funny, these are what these stories are for. When you read the story of how Jacob stole the blessing from his brother Esau, he tricked Isaac into blessing him instead of his brother Esau by disguising himself as Esau. And Esau was so mad, he swore that he was going to kill him. And Isaac said, and his mother, Rebecca, said, we've got to get him out of here because it's not safe for him here. He needs to go off and get him a wife anyway, and let's send him back to my father, Laban, and we'll get him to go back there and find a wife, and why don't you leave right now? And so Jacob, who was a homebody anyway, gathered all his stuff up and headed out to go back to some place he'd never been before, and he was out the first night. Now, this is not scriptural, but I like to think about it. The apocryphal story is that he got robbed by a bunch of highwaymen, and he was by himself on a cold night up there. This was where Bethel is, in a wasteland, and God came to him in a dream. And you remember the dream. The dream's well documented about Jacob's ladder and all of that. And that when Jacob woke up the next morning, he was gratified because God had met him. And he made this commitment to God. He says, if you will be with me, if you will guide me on this path all the way to wherever my uncle lives and getting a wife and all the stuff that's up there. And when I come back here, I'll give you a tenth of everything that you bless me with. And that was Jacob's moment of meeting God. That's when God, and that's what it says here. It says, in a desert land he found him, in a barren and howling waste. He shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. It also has the eagle stirring up its nest, so that.
Oh, it does?
Too. Yeah, it does have that. So, but anyway, and you can, more things work. I'm not saying that's the only thing. You have something else?
Just a little bit of a sidebar. I don't remember him getting robbed.
No, I told you that was apocryphal. I made it up.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Okay.
You can find the story in some of the writings by the Jewish sages, and it might be in one of the.
Yasher?
One of the what? Jasher or something like
Yasher?
that. Yeah,
Jasher.
it's not in the Torah. Yeah.
So can I do the Isaiah 55:11?
Yes, please do.
Let's back up to verse 8.
Mm-hmm.
For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith Jehovah. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Verse 10. For as the rain cometh down and the snow from heaven, and returneth not thither, but watereth the earth, and maketh it bring forth and bud, that it may give seed to the sower and bread to the eater. Verse 11, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it.
Okay, I got two parts out of that. One part was...
Well, the last one was the one that... the last verse was the one.
Is that what the one he was talking about? Okay. Well, certainly the first part is I try to encapsulate that in my statement, God's God and you're not, but that's fine. The last part where he says, my word will not come back void, it'll accomplish what I intend it to. Yeah, that's great. And again, you can know that now because here we are, like I say, 3,500 years later, looking at it. So it's definitely accomplishing his means, his ends, his goals. So if there are no more questions, let's go on. Some of these slides didn't come through quite right. Verse 12, the 12 goes over to, let's see how I can do this. The 12 goes over here, and the word Yahweh goes over here. So it should read, Yahweh alone led him, no foreign god was with him. When Jacob left on that trip, he wasn't a worshiper of foreign gods. It was only Yahweh. He made him ride on the heights. He made him ride on the heights of the land and fed him with the fruit of the fields. He nourished him with honey from the rock and with oil from the flinty crag, with curds and milk from herd and flock, and with fattened lambs and goats, with choice rams of Bashan, and the finest kernels of wheat. And you drank the foaming blood of the grape. Very poetic, this, but it could also describe, if you will, it could describe all kinds of things about Jacob and the history following him, but it certainly could describe how he became rather rich while he worked for Laban. John?
Sorry, I got to back up again.
Okay.
Verse 8.
Yep.
The Septuagint fans will appreciate this. Let's see here. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. And the footnote for the children of Israel is the number of the angels of God. Dead Sea Scrolls reads the number of sons of God.
Okay, that's a good, that sends you off on another path, which is a good path.
I just had to put it in there.
I appreciate that. I think I'll not talk about that right now, but that's a good path. Do you know where that is, that happened, where he divided the nations and gave them their inheritance?
Tower of Babel?
Yep, chapter 11 of Genesis, the Tower of Babel. Since this is what's fun about studying the Torah, is eventually all this stuff kind of starts fitting together. Let me go on. Let's see. Verse 15. Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. Filled with food, they became sleek and heavy. They abandoned the God who made them and rejected the rock, their Savior. They made him jealous with their foreign gods and angered him with their detestable idols. Okay, Jeshurun is an unusual word. As I researched that, they have, the best guess is that it's a, what do you call it, a diminutive form of Israel. If you traced its roots back, it could mean upright or righteous. But the idea, a diminutive form, is something it's a cutesy name, if you will, like a baby duck is a duckling, or you use the word Billy for some guy whose name is William. So Jeshurun is kind of a cutesy name for Israel. That's the best analogy I've got. But Jeshurun is used only 4 times in the whole Bible, and 3 of them are in Deuteronomy. Anyway, so Israel, if you will, grew fat and kicked. Filled with food, they became heavy and sleek. They abandoned the God who made them and rejected the rock, their Savior. Now, Israel certainly hasn't been all that great at being obedient to God's commands so far, but this is clearly talking about the future. Israel, I say clearly, this could be talking about the future. They go into the promised land. God keeps his part of the bargain. They get the land and they get rich. And what they do is, filled with food, they become heavy and sleek, and they abandon God and rejected the rock, their Savior. So they basically started looking at other gods, which is the one thing he told them not to do. Verse 16, they made him jealous with their foreign gods and angered him with their detestable idols. So this is the prophetic part of the song.
So what were the, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What were the other places of Jeshurun? So it's my understanding that's just another term for Israel. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There are 3 other times in the book of Deuteronomy, and there's one other time, and I think it's in the book of Numbers.
Where he struck, so...
No, that's the only 4 times that word is used in the whole Bible.
What was the context of the one in Numbers? When he struck the rock?
They were all this way. They were all God speaking of Israel in a poetic way.
Okay.
So there's nothing, the reason I wanted to bring it up was because otherwise it could be a little bit confusing. Where did this name come from?
Right.
And so...
Just so, the rock of salvation in Hebrew is, it's tzur is the rock. I don't want to mess it up. Yeah.
It ought to have a Yeshua or something like that.
Oh, it's just tzur, and then the salvation is Yeshua to.
Yeshua to. Okay.
Right.
All right. Good. We'll move on. Moving on down through the song, verse 17. They sacrificed to false gods which were not God, gods they had not known, gods that recently appeared, gods your ancestors did not fear. You deserted the rock, you who fathered you. You forgot the God who gave you birth. Yahweh saw this and rejected them because he was angered by his sons and daughters. I will hide my face from them, he said, and see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children who are unfaithful. They made me jealous by what is no God and angered me with their worthless idols. I will make them envious by those who are not a people, and I will make them angry by a nation that has no understanding. So again, it's real clear that God described this as, let this song be a witness against them from me. John?
So where does it talk about not a people? What is that in Hebrew?
Lo ami.
I have a note to look at Romans 10:19. I'm guessing that's...
Well, Romans 10:19 is a quote from Hosea 1.
So it all circles back.
It all circles back. Hosea was a prophet that was specifically to the northern kingdom, before the northern kingdom was annihilated by Assyria. And God told Hosea to go marry a prostitute. And he had I was going to do this later, but I'll do it now. He had 3 children. The first was a son named Jezreel. Now, if you go back and look at what Jezreel means to scatter. And then he had another son named Lo-Ami, which means not a people, because he said, you will not be my people anymore. And then he had, I think this last one might have been a daughter, Lo-Rumama. I thought it was Ruhama. Anyway, go look it up in Hosea 1, which means not loved. So the people are not loved, they're not his people, and they will be scattered. That's all prophesied in the first chapter of Hosea, and it's exactly what he said he was going to do here in verse 21 of Deuteronomy, which was, 800 years earlier. Pretty amazing, if you ask me. Any questions?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Or are you going to go to the next?
No, you go. I'd go, but go ahead if there's
Yeah,
questions.
well, I just wanted to go back to the devils. Well, I don't know what yours says in verse 16.
Verse 16.
I'll read it while you go back.
No, I'll go back.
They provoked him to jealousy with strange gods, which is in italics. With abominations provoked they him to anger. Oh, I'm sorry, it is 17. You were there.
Okay.
They sacrificed unto devils, not to God.
Okay.
What does yours say?
Mine says, sacrifice to false gods, which are not God. So it's similar, if not the same.
The footnote here, by the way, I'm looking at my article that I wrote up. If you want to go check it out yourself, it's on myhebrewbible.com, article number 959. So, in verse 9, it says, the Hebrew word is H7700. That's the Hebrew Strong's number. And it's shed. That's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the Greek is daemonion or devil.
Demons, maybe.
Like
Yep.
Dominion almost sounds like that too.
Yeah.
We have a question here locally.
Okay. A local question.
I just want to put a plug in for Dr. Michael Heiser. He has a book called Unseen Realm. If you go to YouTube, he's got, just search Michael Heiser, Divine Counsel 101, and Michael Heiser Supernatural Seminar, or Michael Heiser Deuteronomy 32. What we're talking about is a Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Heiser has a PhD in ancient Semitic languages, and he's been studying this his whole life. So he's got some excellent, in-depth, deeply in-depth information on this chapter, with tons of footnotes. There's been this massive amount of discoveries over the last few decades.
That's cool.
In ancient texts and archaeology and on and on and on. It's just a wealth of information, and this stuff is super interesting. You need to know it anyway if you want to understand what's happening in the world today right now, especially over the next few months. You're going to want to understand this chapter.
Okay. Thanks. I like Michael Heiser. I've enjoyed reading his books. Okay. I'm going to move on. Verse 22, for a fire will be kindled by my wrath, one that burns down to the realm of the dead below. It will devour the earth and its harvests, and set afire the foundations of mountains. I will heap calamities on them and spin my arrows against them. I will send wasting famine against them, consuming pestilence and deadly plague. I will send against them the fangs of wild beasts, the venom of vipers that glide in the dust. In the street, the sword will make them childless. In their homes, terror will reign. The young men and young women will perish, and the infants and those with gray hair. Now this has got to be, you know what, this is like that song about the teen, I can't remember the name of the song, but the motorcycle rider that, you know, the song is sung by this girl, and she loved this guy that had this motorcycle revving up in the middle of the song, and he goes out and gets killed in a motorcycle wreck. I mean, that's this kind of song, right? It's a very tragic song. It's a tragic ballad, because this whole slide is full of horrible things that are going to happen to Israel. So, we'll move on. Verse 26 said, I said I would scatter them and erase their name from human memory. See Hosea chapter 1. But I dreaded the taunt of the enemy, lest the adversary misunderstand and say, our hand has triumphed. Yahweh has not done all of this. They are a nation without sense. There is no discernment in them. If only they were wise and would understand this and discern what their end will be. How could one man chase 1,000 or two put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them, unless Yahweh had given them up? For their rock is not like our rock, as even our enemies concede. Their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah, and their grapes are filled with the poison and their clusters with bitterness. So one of the things that jumped out at me from this particular part of the song, verse 27, see, verse 26 says, I said I would scatter them and erase their name from human memory. That's Jezreel and Lo Ami. But I dreaded the taunt of the enemy, lest the adversary misunderstand and say, our hand has triumphed. Yahweh has not done all of this. In other words, that's Satan saying, we won, we won. He couldn't do it. We beat him. And so God is basically sitting here saying, but I can't let this happen. I can't let them be totally destroyed because it would be bad for my cred. You know, it would make it look like I'm not really God. I can't do the things I said I would do. And so I love that because there's few other places we see that. So now I'm going to ask the audience, does anybody remember another place where that same argument was kind of used? Or similar argument? Yeah.
So the audience wasn't kind of distracted. So
Yeah, I saw the one member in the audience.
Could you just
Okay, what I was saying was this verse 27.
27, okay.
God is talking, and he says, I dreaded the taunt of the enemy, lest the adversary misunderstand and say, our hand has triumphed. Yahweh has not done all this.
That's the part specifically?
Yeah, that's the part. I mean, the argument.
Well, I would think Moses saying to God, if you wipe out all of Israel, your enemies are going to make sport of you or whatever.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going for. There's at least twice in the book of Exodus where God gets mad at the Israelites and basically tells, I'll paraphrase, he tells Moses, you stand over here. I'm going to wipe them all out and we'll start over. And Moses intercedes on behalf of Israel. He says, no, don't do that. Don't do that, because he has a lot of reasons why. But one of the reasons is, what would the Egyptians say? What would all the people say if you brought your people out of Egypt with all these miracles to turn them into your great nation, and then they all were destroyed? They'd say, well, he couldn't do it. And although we of course know that God wasn't swayed by that argument, but boy, that's the argument. And he says here, lest people misunderstand and think that the adversary can win this battle, then I'm not going to let this happen. It's the first glimmer of hope in this otherwise totally sad song.
It's better to end good than start
Yep.
in bad.
So let's
So are you
go ahead.
Go
You have
on?
another?
Are you going to go on?
I was going to go on.
Well, so let's talk about the rock.
Okay, that's a good idea.
I mentioned before, I got here on the top of my notes.
Mm-hmm.
I call this the chapter that rocks. Why? Because there are 8 instances of Hatzur, the rock,
Oh, really?
in this chapter. Twice in the
chapter. I believe
in
that. There's
31 that's mentioned twice.
two.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 2 of them right here.
But I want to read the modern state of Israel, the Declaration of Establishment of State of Israel, last paragraph.
Okay.
Placing your trust in the Rock of Israel, we affix our signatures to this proclamation at the session of the Provisional Council of State on the soil of the homeland in the city of Tel Aviv on this Sabbath eve, the 5th day of ER 5708, or the 14th of May, 1948.
That's pretty cool. I did not know that. So they actually call him the Rock of Israel in their Declaration of Independence.
Right. I think there was I'm recalling back to the movie that we showed the movie here probably a couple of years ago. I think it was on Independence Day for Israel. Anyway, there was a lot of secularists who were like, we don't want anything to do with any religious stuff in here at all. And there was, there were some that, well, yeah, what do you mean? Of course we have to have that in there. Mm-hmm. So I think this was kind of the compromise to be as sort of an allusion to God without actually
using the word.
Right.
Yeah.
The rock. Everybody knows who the Rock of Israel is. We're not saying his name explicitly, but there it is in our Declaration of Independence,
that's
effectively.
A good point. That's a good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. Okay, we'll move along. Verse 33. This is a continuation of God's discussion about a verse. Okay, let me go back to verse 31. He's talking about the other gods. He says, "For their rock is not like our rock. Even our enemies concede. Their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are filled with poison and their clusters with bitterness. Their wine is the venom of serpents, the deadly poison of cobras. Have not I kept this in reserve and sealed it in my vaults? It is mine to avenge, I will repay. In due time their foot will slip, their day of disaster is near, and their doom rushes upon them. Yahweh will vindicate his people and relent concerning his servants when he sees their strength is gone and no one is left, slave or free. He will say, now where are their gods, the rock they took refuge in, the gods who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offerings? Let them rise up to help you. Let them give you shelter. So God's basically making fun of them.
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, this is rational. It's like you have a contract with me, and I'm supposed to be your welfare provider, if I can use that in that sense.
Yep.
And now you come to me asking for the benefits of being a welfare provider, and I'm like, and God's like, well, you already
signed up with this guy.
You signed up with somebody else over here, which is a direct violation of what I told you to do.
Yeah. So let me back up just a little bit, continue the thought here. He will say, now where are their gods, the rock they took refuge in, the gods who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offerings? Let them rise up and help you. Let them give you shelter. See now that I myself am he. There is no God besides me. I put to death and I bring to life. I have wounded and I will heal, and no one can deliver out of my hand. I lift my hand to heaven and solemnly swear, as surely as I live forever, when I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand grasps it in judgment, I will take vengeance on my adversaries and repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, while my sword devours flesh, the blood of the slain and the captives, the heads of the enemy leaders. Rejoice, you nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and he will take vengeance on his enemies and make atonement for his land and people. So he will prevail.
Who are his enemies? If you're from Israel, are you immune? I mean, if your genealogy is Israel or whatever, are you immune from not being accused of his enemy?
No, obviously.
Right.
Obviously not. It's those who have willingly signed up for the covenant with him, have chosen to be his people, and take it seriously enough to actually try to follow the terms of the contract. If you ask me, that's who it is. He goes on, verse 43 says, rejoice, you nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants. So it's like I want to be careful how I put this, but his offer is open to people other than those who are, as you say, genealogically descended from Israel. It always has been, by the way. That's a question that I'd be glad to go over sometime. God accepts anyone who understands what they're getting into and voluntarily says, I want your God to be my God, and I want your people to be my people. So he loves the adoptees. So, do you have any other thoughts? That's the end of the song. song of Moses?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see here. That's the end of the song, not the chapter.
No, it's not.
Okay. I jumped the gun.
Okay, I got a little bit more yet here. So that's the end of the song. Finishing the chapter, Moses, starting in verse 44, Moses came with Joshua the son of Nun and spoke all the words of this song in the hearing of the people. When Moses finished reciting all these words to all Israel, he said to them, "Take to heart all the words I have solemnly declared to you this day, so that you may command your children to obey carefully all the words of this law. They are not just idle words for you, they are your life. By them you will live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess." To me, that's the key word in the whole book. These are not just idle words for you, they are your life. John.
So, in the age of enlightenment and progressive thinking, more specifically, the church has kind of glommed onto this, whether they want to admit it or not. And I would even argue the theory of evolution sort of, in a weird way, the church sort of glommed onto that too. That they're ignoring, my point is they're ignoring this. They're saying, and this goes way back to the first or second century of the church, where they wanted to move past, they wanted to get past Judah, I would argue, because they wanted to have a good relationship with Rome.
Yep.
So to do that, they said, those laws are for the Jews and that old-timey Testament, and so that's what I'm saying. They're going beyond. They're not listening to Moses. This is your life, and they're not listening.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think every believer in his heart has to deal with this, because you'll actually hear it from your antinomian church leaders, that'll say, well, all that's been done away with. That's history. It's about the Jews. It's not about us. But there is, Yeshua never said that. And in order to put the words in Paul's mouth that he said it, you have to do some pretty fancy gymnastics. So this remains the case. And then the other thing that's important here, he says, that you may command your children to obey carefully all these words. It's not enough that one generation be fairly obedient to God's word. They've got to teach their kids to do it, because their kids have got to teach it to their kids. And here we are, I don't know how many generations it must be, but 3,500 years must be a good 100 or so generations, I'll bet. There's a lot of generations have passed since these words were written, but God's word hasn't changed a bit. And, you can't find I've had a lot of people tell me, well, heck, who knows what's in that Bible? It's been messed around with by people for years and years and years. And while it may have been messed around with some, the solution to that is to get lots of different versions and read them and see how they compare. And furthermore, we know for a fact that the stuff that we're reading today has been translated from something that's authentic to several decades before the birth of Yeshua. And there's not anything in the entire world that's that authenticatable. Yeah.
Well, just going back to the teaching of the children, if you don't teach them, obviously the next generation isn't, you have to pass this knowledge and wisdom to the next generation and then the generation after that on indefinitely.
Yep.
Or it doesn't just happen through osmosis.
No.
It has to be.
It has to be.
It's almost like every new generation is a generation that came out of
Egypt.
out of Egypt, and you have to tell them just like.
Yeah, I've often thought about that, though. It's kind of a sad thing because, and he even alluded to it here in this song. It said he's talked about Jacob. Grew sleek and fat. They were well fed. They prospered, and they forgot about God. And, I think about our country a lot in that regard. We got rich and and had lots of fun things to do, and we forgot about God. And obviously, you can't do that. He'll let you get away with that for, I don't know, maybe a couple of generations or two. But in the end, he's going to have to be just. He's going to have to bring the accounts up to date.
The kind of the insidious part about this whole thing is that won't happen unless it's kind of like gradually done over generations.
Yeah.
And so, in contrast to, let's say, the generation that went out of the desert and the generation that, the generation that went out of Egypt into the desert, in contrast to the generation that came from out of the desert into the promised land.
Yeah.
There were people that were experiencing both of those, so they know firsthand.
What's right,
that was
what's
a stark
wrong.
contrast.
Yep.
But in our time, it's like, well, it's just slowly. It's the proverbial frog in the boiling hot water.
Yeah. I remember we had some conversation. Someone the other day that was talking about how they remember back when they were little kids, everything was closed on Sunday around town. Now, granted, it was the wrong day, but it was for the right reason. And there's a lot of things like that. You remember when they, this is one of my favorite things, when I Love Lucy was on television and they wanted to show a bedroom scene, they gave them twin beds because they knew it was too shocking to imagine Lucy and Desi sleeping together in the same bed. Boy, have we come a little ways from that or what? So yeah, it's a slow, subtle thing. Like you say, it's like the frog in the hot water. It's a shame, though. The only cure is to spend time in His Word, really. Let me go on and finish the chapter. Verse 48, on that same day, Yahweh told Moses, go up to the Abarim range, to Mount Nebo, in Moab, across from Jericho, to view Canaan, the land that I am giving to the Israelites as their own possession. There on the mountain that you have climbed, you will die and be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people. This is because both of you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the desert of Zin, and because you did not uphold my holiness among the Israelites. Therefore, you will see the land only from a distance. You will not enter the land that I'm giving to the people of Israel. So, obviously, if you wanted to read the story of the time that Aaron and Moses broke faith with God, it's in Numbers chapter 20. But that'd be a pretty stark thing to hear from God. Okay, after you get through with this, walk up the top of that hill because you're going to die up there. Actually, I wouldn't mind that, I suppose. In ways, take some uncertainty out of life.
So,
Yes.
I have a note, 1 Corinthians 10:4, where it mentions that the rock had followed them in the desert, and it was from this rock that the miracle of the spiritual living water sprang forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Well, we're doing pretty good. The big struggle for me is trying to actually get an hour and a half's worth of stuff here, and I think I might make it. We'll see. You're doing good. You're doing good. Okay, let's move on to chapter 33. So this is the chapter, much like the one of those latter chapters in the book of Genesis, where the patriarch, in that case it would be Jacob. Jacob blesses his sons, and this is Moses blessing the tribes. So it's essentially a similar kind of blessing. One of the things that might be fun to do someday, and I didn't do it for today, but I just now thought of it, would be to compare those two blessings. The one that's in, I forgot what chapter it is, but it's the one where Jacob blesses his sons, and this one here, and look at the different blessings that's pronounced for each son.
Yeah, it's like starts in 48 or 49
Something like that.
or 50,
That's like,
yeah.
something like that. But anyway, let's go through this blessing, or these blessings, and some of them are kind of neat, but some of them just leave me flat, and we'll talk about it. Maybe you because of this vast audience that we have, maybe you'll get something out of them that I didn't see. That usually happens, and that's why I really like having people in the audience, is because they usually find things that I don't find. So anyway, verse 33, or chapter 33. This is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, pronounced on the Israelites before his death. He said, Yahweh came from Sinai and dawned over them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with myriads of holy ones from the south, from his mountain slopes. Surely it is you who love the people. All the holy ones are in your hand. At your feet they all bow down, and from you receive instruction, the law that Moses gave us, the possession of the assembly of Jacob. He was king over Jeshurun when the leaders of the people assembled, along with the tribes of Israel. So that's just kind of an introduction. Yes?
The fiery saints. Or did you want to comment on this?
Well, I would say a couple of things.
Okay. Go ahead.
First of all, it says he came from Sinai, Mount Seir, and Mount Paran, or Seir and Mount Paran. Sinai, as we know, is in the Arabian Peninsula, south of where they are now. Seir is another name for Petra, which is south of where they are now. And Mount Paran is, I assume it's some mountain in the desert of Paran, which is a little bit south and west of where they are now. He came with myriads of holy ones from the south, which is, all of those are from the south, and from his mountain slopes. If his mountain is Mount Sinai, then all of those are an appropriate place to be from his mountain slopes. Now, who they are is their myriads and myriads of holy ones. That's a whole different issue, and we can someday we ought to do a study about who those might be. But if I'll give you a hint, if you want to read some of Michael Heiser's books, you might get some of that. Did you have something you want to talk about?
Yeah, the saints.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Jude 1:14, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these saints. Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints.
Okay. Typically, the saints has been thought of as the believers in the Messiah, are the believers in God who have passed on into eternity. But I don't know that even fits with this. So I reserve a lot of that stuff to the shelf that I have in my brain that says, I don't quite get that right now, but someday I hope to understand it.
So the Hebrew word is kodesh.
Holy.
Yeah.
Yeah, set apart.
That's the saints.
Yeah. That's what mine says, holy ones.
The fiery law, ishdat.
Okay.
The two words are fiery ish and law, datim, which is an interesting, that's like knowledge, or it's not Torah interesting. Anyway, the Hebrew there is an instance, this is a bit of a geeky thing. In the Hebrew, there's an instance of keri kativ, which you'd have to see it here on the website, where they have footnotes of how you could actually, keri kativ this is how it's written, but here's how we say it.
Okay.
There's 30 of those, I think, in there. So this is one where they've actually taken the ish dot is two separate words or the same word. I don't know what the significance of it is. But
Okay, so it's a place you could go off and get lost in the weeds if you want to.
right.
All right. Well, anyway, that was kind of an introduction. And now we go into the blessings. And some of them are long, some of them not so much. Verse 6 is Reuben's blessing. Let Reuben live and not die, nor his people be few. And I have a footnote in my Bible that says, but let his people be few. So that's exactly the opposite meaning. Let Reuben live and not die, nor his people be few, or let Reuben live and not die, but let his people be few. And so it means, obviously, given that they didn't know how to translate it, it's hard to tell what exactly that meant. What do we know about Reuben? Remember where Reuben ended up in Israel, where Reuben's tribal inheritance was? Oh, we have an answer over here. Yes.
Him and Gad, I guess they were buddies. I don't know.
Mhm. Yep.
They went to Moses and said, "You know what? We kind of like this side of the railroad track or the river, I guess."
Yep. Yep.
And Moses kind of flipped out a little bit.
Yep.
And he says, "All right." Then they settled down, figured it out, and says, "I'll tell you what. You go over there, but I'm going to give you half of the tribe of Manasseh as well to settle on this side of the
Yep.
of the Jordan.
Yep. So Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh settled on the east side of the Jordan River, which is what today is mostly mostly Jordan and a little bit of Syria. Not a lot to go on there. Let's look at Judah. Verse 7. For Judah, and this he said about Judah, "Hear, Yahweh, the cry of Judah. Bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. Oh, be his help against his foes." Okay. Judah, the cry of Judah, bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. It's kind of difficult. It's hard to say. These words are, I think, purposefully vague. But one of the things I kind of got out of reading that was that Judah felt a sense of responsibility for the whole family, much more so than any of the three of his elder brothers. If you look at the four eldest brothers in Jacob's clan, in Israel's family, they're Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and then Judah. And if you watch how they behaved, the only one that was remarkable from the stories that lived through the book of Genesis was Judah. Judah handled himself. I mean, it wasn't that he was all that righteous, but when push came to shove, he usually did the righteous thing. He was the one that didn't really want to sell Joseph into captivity, or didn't want to kill Joseph. I think the thing that redeems Judah in my mind was when the family was back trying to get food from the Egyptians, who was being administered by Joseph, and they didn't recognize Joseph. And Joseph concocted this elaborate plot so that Benjamin would be framed, and he could say to the family, well, Benjamin's the thief. I'll keep him here, and you guys can go back to your father. And Judah couldn't stand it. The others, I guess they were in various different degrees of amazement. But Judah said, "No, don't sin, don't keep him, because I couldn't go back to my father and tell him that," I'll put this in, yet another one of his only two favorite sons was killed, or was taken from him. So I'll go instead. And I think that was Judah's major claim to fame.
Comment.
Do you have a thought?
I'm slow again. I need to back up to verse 5.
Maybe I go too fast. Maybe it's not that you're slow.
Well, I'm multitasking over here. And I'm lazy.
It's handling all those calls that are coming in. We need a call handler.
So verse 5, I'm just curious how yours,
Says, he was king over Jeshurun when the leaders of the people assembled, along with the tribes of Israel.
So we haven't gotten to talking about the tribes yet.
No,
Reuben
this is all introduction.
Right.
Yeah.
So who is he?
Well, I thought it was God more than anything else.
Yeah. But so who's the first king?
God. Okay.
God.
I'll give you that. Was that your point?
Well, that's part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
I believe that.
I think I have a footnote here. He is not very compelling to say that he is meant to be talking about Moses, because he is about to die.
Yeah.
In Deuteronomy 34.
It can't be anybody else. Yeah.
The companion Bible notes that he equals Jehovah from Deuteronomy 33:2. See the structure above. And king, who is the Melech king of Israel? Answer. That was the question. Answer, Yehovah, not Shaul.
Yeah. And I see what I meant by verse 2, because up there in verse 2 it says, he said. It says, this is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, pronounced on the Israelites before his death. Well, it says he said. But it can't be him. It's got to be God.
So Jeshurun, was that the one we were talking about earlier? Jeshurun, or was that?
No. Well, Jeshurun was that word, yes. This is the second place, or maybe the third place that it appears
Okay.
in Deuteronomy.
All right. The audience is caught up to the
Okay.
presenter.
Well, let's move on to Levi. For Levi, about Levi, he said, your Thummim and Urim belong to your faithful servant. You tested him at Massa. You contended with him at the waters of Meribah. He said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them. He did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children, but he watched over your word and guarded your covenant. He teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on the altar. Bless all his skills, Yahweh, and be pleased with the work of his hands. Strike down those who rise against him, his foes, till they rise no more. Now,
So-
old Levi gets a big one. He gets quite a few words here. And there's some stuff to pick up on.
Well, I have a kind of a conspiracy, not really a conspiracy, but
Okay.
well, I guess at this point we don't know who's writing this. If it's still Moses, what tribe is Moses from?
He's from Levi.
So-
Good point. So he's
So
patting himself on the back.
yeah, he's like,
Yeah,
well, let's
okay.
get a plug from my kinfolk over here.
I hadn't thought about that, but that could be.
No, I'm
That's
kind
all
of
right.
kidding. So where does it say he tested God in your chapter, in your
It says
verse?
right in the middle of verse 8. It says, your Thummim and Urim belong to your faithful servant. You tested him at Massa, and you contended with him at the waters of Meribah. You
So
know
the
what those
King
are?
James, well, the King James says, with the Holy One whom thou didst prove at Massa.
Well, prove and test are the same thing.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm thinking of like, do you want to, should we be testing God?
No, but
The test was really was Levi,
Yeah.
tested and they passed the test.
yeah, it was the test was it was not God. It was the Levites that were being tested. It was Levi.
Right.
And to me, what that refers to. First of all, you remember Thummim and Urim are the light and the perfection that the high priest used to answer inquiries or to see what God would say about different inquiries that was brought before the entire nation of Israel.
It was on the breastplate.
Yeah, well, it was within the breastplate. The breastplate was this folded over thing, and those things fit inside of it. The testing at Massa, does anybody know what that is?
I'm assuming
Surely
that
in this vast crowd out here, somebody
someone
knows.
is.
What?
I'm going to answer for the guy over there.
Okay, answer for that guy over here.
Was the golden calf?
Yep, that was the golden calf. And I forgot what the waters of Meribah were, but they're both times when the children of Israel were testing God, and Levi, the Levites, stood in the gap. The Levites came to bat.
Was it when the plague was going and
Yep.
Aaron ran out in
Yep.
front of, that's Meribah?
I bet so. I'd
can't
have to go
remember
back
either.
and look, but I could believe that.
That makes sense.
So then verse 9 says, he said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them. He did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children, but he watched over your word and guarded your covenant. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, that's definitely talking about, for me, he's definitely talking about the golden calf because he showed no respect of people who were sinning.
Well, that's a good, I hadn't taken it that way, but that's good. That fits.
He was willing to kill everybody.
Even
and
his brothers or mother or
well,
father.
Wait a
yeah.
minute, I'm your mother. Too
Yeah.
bad. I don't care.
Yeah.
It's not,
You don't get any special.
you're not a
special
respecter.
treatment.
God has no respecter of persons, so that
Well,
applies
what
to me.
I thought that meant was the instructions that the priest had with respect to their job. They weren't allowed to mourn for the death of a close member of their family. And so if mother or father died, or if something would happen, if he lost his sons, he wasn't allowed to mourn for the loss of his sons.
Right.
And so I thought it had to do with that because he had to watch over God's word and guard the covenant. That was his most important job, and he couldn't become ceremonially unclean. Anyway, verse 10 says, he teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel, which is what the Levites were supposed to do. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar, which is what the Levites were supposed to do. Bless all his skills, Yahweh, and be pleased with the work of his hands. Strike down those who rise up against him, foes till they rise no more. So that's Levi. Yes.
So they shall teach, I'm looking at verse 10. They shall teach Jacob my judgments and Israel the law, the Torah. I'm sure that's what that is. Let me go look here real quick.
Yep.
So it's instructions. Now, I would say it's instructions about the law, but part of that big picture is the judgment. So it isn't just teaching them about whatever, our culture or whatever. I'm trying to emphasize the weightiness of the law, and that's saying that here because it's also connecting judgments with that.
Well,
I
sure.
guess.
Yeah, I agree with that because it's, the covenant, right? That's what it really is, the importance of the covenant and the value of keeping it. Let's move on. Oh my gosh, I might actually not finish. For Benjamin gets a verse. About Benjamin, he said, let the beloved of Yahweh rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long, and the one Yahweh loves rests between his shoulders. This is pretty cryptic, to say the least. Benjamin had a rather small territory, but the small territory of Benjamin had one important city in it, right? Jerusalem is in the territory of Benjamin. And it sits this between his shoulders could, with a stretch, refer to the fact that Jerusalem and Benjamin's territory sit between the whole northern kingdom of Israel and Judah, which is the southern kingdom of Israel. Yeah.
Just a footnote on that. I was listening to a podcast many years ago with Nehemiah Gordon. He talks about how Jerusalem was in Benjamin, and maybe David had it there for political reasons because of the former king's Shaul, a Benjamite.
Okay. That makes good sense.
David was from Judah.
Yep.
Unless some are trying to argue that he was Ephraim. We have to go. I don't know. Whatever. I think he's Judah.
Let's go on. Joseph. For Joseph, about Joseph, he said, may Yahweh bless his land with precious dew from heaven above and with deep waters that lie below. With the best the sun offers forth, the sun brings forth, and the finest the moon can yield, with choicest gifts of the ancient mountains and the fruitfulness of the everlasting hills, with the best gifts of the earth and its fullness and the favor of him who dwelt in the burning bush. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. In majesty he is like a firstborn bull. His horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he will gore the nations, even those at the ends of the earth. Such are the 10,000s of Ephraim, such are the thousands of Manasseh. So Joseph, as you know, includes both Ephraim and Manasseh. So he kind of combined them together and blessed the tribe of Joseph. We know that Ephraim and Manasseh, as well as about 8 other tribes, were essentially blown to smithereens and scattered, Jezreeled all over the earth. But that might fit with this idea of verse 17. His horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he will gore the nations, even those at the ends of the earth. Such are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and such are the thousands of Manasseh. In other words, that kind of fits with the fact that they've been scattered all over the earth. It's a stretch, but best I could do. It also talks about the Ephraim and Manasseh had land that was north of, let's see, you kind of got to know a little about the geography, but Jerusalem, if we consider Jerusalem about halfway north-south, pretty much everything south of Jerusalem is desert. I mean, it's not horrible desert, but it's desert. Whereas everything north of Jerusalem is pretty productive land. And some of it is extremely productive land. The farther north you get, the better the land is. And Ephraim and Manasseh, as well as the other 8 tribes associated with the northern kingdom of Israel, lived in those lands. And so may God bless his land with precious dew from heaven above and with the deep waters that lie below, the best the sun brings forth and the finest the moon can yield, with choicest gifts of the ancient mountains and the fullness of the everlasting hills, on and on. That kind of describes the productive nature of the land that Joseph ended up with. Yeah.
So just geographically thinking here, Ephraim would be like the southern part of the northern part. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Ephraim is basically just north of Jerusalem.
Yep.
And then Manasseh's got a big area. Even
half
of it is.
It goes clear across to the east side of the river.
Yeah.
So Manasseh's very big.
Right.
But it's productive up there. Let's go on. Now this Zebulun and Issachar, they don't even get separate verses. They just get the same verse. Verse 18, about Zebulun, he said, "Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and you, Issachar, in your tents. They will summon peoples to the mountain, and there offer the sacrifices of the righteous. They will feast on the abundance of the seas and on treasures hidden in the sand." Issachar, I think, is on the Mediterranean Ocean, and Zebulun is in the mountains just to the east of there. So I think that kind of fits that, but again, that's pretty much a stretch. This is why this is hard, is because they're not real specific, and you kind of end up grasping at straws. But that's all right. Let's go on about Gad here. About Gad, he said, "Blessed is he who enlarges Gad's domain. Gad lives there like a lion, tearing at arm or head. He chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. When the heads of the people assembled, he'd carry out Yahweh's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel." Gad was the other guy, besides Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh, that ended up with land east of the Jordan River.
So that's kind of a powerful blessing, it seems to me. Unless, I suppose you could put a negative spin on it. Well, I'm looking at when the heads of the people assembled, he carried out Yahweh's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel. Now, maybe is that Gad as a troop? I'm trying to think of the previous in Genesis 49:19. Gad, a troop, shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. Was Gad the best at taking out the lands of the inhabitants? Is that?
I don't know. You could be right.
I mean, I was just thinking about that off the top of my head.
Yeah. I didn't really research it too much.
Like he's good at the military aspect.
Could be.
I don't know.
That sounds like a good homework problem. Let me go on. For Dan, or old Dan gets about half a verse. About Dan, he said, "Dan is a lion's cub springing out of Bashan." Bashan is that land that, again, is east of the Jordan River. Dan is an interesting guy from the standpoint of his land was supposed to be over there on the coast about, where Tel Aviv is now. But he could never subdue the Philistines. And so I guess it was Joshua ended up giving him land way up north. And that would be the lion's cub springing out of Bashan. But I don't know. That's just a shot in the dark. And again, good research topics for you guys if you want to go into that. Verse 23 says, about Naphtali, he said, "Naphtali is abounding with favor of Yahweh and is full of his blessing. He will inherit southward to the lake." Well, that's actually helpful. The lake is the Sea of Galilee, and if you go just north of the Sea of Galilee, north and a little bit west, was Naphtali's tribal inheritance. So sure enough, he inherited southward to the lake. And for Asher, about Asher he said, most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him bathe his feet in oil. The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze, and your strength will equal your days. Asher is the one that had the northern coast. It's up there bordering on Lebanon. Okay, I would like to be able to say that we got a lot out of this, but I always have trouble with these. It's a little bit vague. And the fact that we've got the 3,500 years of history that we kind of know about doesn't even seem to help that much, at least for me. But that's okay, because I've got other stuff I wanted to talk about anyway. So, moving right along. Let's look at Deuteronomy 33. Oh, I'm sorry, this is still 33. We've got to conclude the blessings. There's no one like the God of Jeshurun, who rides across the heavens to help you, and on the clouds in his majesty. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemies before you, saying, destroy them. So Israel will live in safety. Jacob will dwell secure in the land of new grain and new wine, where the heavens drop dew. Blessed are you, Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by Yahweh? He is your shield and helper, your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will tread on their heights. This is pretty positive. But the reason this is positive is because God had said that I will give you this land. And he does. He gives them the land. And they do defeat the enemy. But they also forget to pay attention to the Torah, which ends up being their undoing. Any thoughts? The last chapter of Deuteronomy is not very long. So let's go read that. Then Moses climbed, this is Deuteronomy 34. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. And there Yahweh showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. And then Yahweh said to him, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. So, rather a bad picture. This is a monument, a statue, or if you want to call it that was designed by an Italian artist, Fantoni, the brazen serpent. But that's a monument to, it's on Mount Nebo, and it's a monument to Moses. It's not necessarily Moses' burial place. We know that because nobody really knows where he was buried. But you can go there. I was there. I took that picture. So verse 5 says, Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in Moab, as Yahweh had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Verse 9. Now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what Yahweh had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders that Yahweh had sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Thus endeth the book of Deuteronomy, and thus endeth the Torah. So it's appropriate to kind of summarize things a little bit. I really didn't save myself enough time, but that's okay.
Well, we can go over a little bit.
We might. Let me see if I can get over here. The book of Deuteronomy is very powerful, and I've called it sufficient. And the reason I use the word sufficient is based on a story in 2 Kings. It takes up 2 chapters. It's chapter 22 and 23, and it tells the story of Josiah. Josiah was a son of, I forgot who, but it was one of the bad kings that the southern kingdom had. And when he was a young man, his chief priest was out messing around cleaning the temple, and back in a corner in somewhere, he happened to find this old scroll, and he unrolled it and started reading it, and it was the Torah. People believe, certainly the Jewish sages believe, it was the book of Deuteronomy. And as he was reading it, he realized it was a pretty interesting thing. So he took it to Josiah and had Josiah read it. And as Josiah read it, he started weeping. And they realized what they had done. They realized that they had forgotten the Torah. You can imagine what must have been going on in the temple if nobody knew where the Torah was, right? And nobody had read it and they weren't familiar with it. And so Josiah, I'm paraphrasing, the story is very good. You really ought to go read it. I had intended to read it, but I don't, at 8:27, I don't really want to spend the time. But it's really useful to read the story because it actually rings true. And so I wanted to make a couple of comments about the Torah in general. I'm not bragging, but I've studied the Torah for 20 some odd years now, and every day I become more convinced that it's God's word for us and that it really deserves careful scrutiny. But some of the things that have really helped me is I've learned a broad outline of history. You need to know what's happened to Israel. You need to know, what happened after Deuteronomy here. You need to know what Joshua did. You need to know about the judges and how the kingdom of Israel was only about 120 years before it split into 2 parts, and how the northern kingdom was obliterated by the Assyrians, and about 150 years later, the southern kingdom was captured by the Babylonians, and how the whole thing was, you need to know that history in your head so that whenever you're reading the prophets and some of the various things within the Bible, you get an idea for what was going on at the time. But the thing is it's all one plan, and the plan was clearly specified here in Deuteronomy. We know what God's trying to do, and he's been working on this since the beginning. The very beginning, but he's certainly been working about it since he talked to Abraham about it. So you need to read about God's plan. And then I got some things. If you want to go read about God's plan for Israel, other than in Deuteronomy, which is a great place, the book of Hosea, chapter 1 especially, is really good. And Jeremiah, chapter 30 and 31, some of the stuff that Mark was reading last Shabbat, which is, I thought, extremely meaningful and extremely appropriate for what's going on today. Ezekiel 36 and 37 are good things to read. So God's clearly revealed his plan for mankind in his word, and you need to make sure that you're in good standing with God so that, as I wrote down here, the future looks a little bumpy. As we sit here in these quarantine kinds of things, and me talking to a non-existent audience, and we wonder what's going on, and life is really kind of up in the air right now. I was talking to Dave about it. If you were God and you were trying to get the attention of mankind, what would you do? What kind of things would you do? Might you allow a plague to be generated, a coronavirus that runs through the earth and makes, is pretty horrible, wipes out lots of people and makes everybody frightened? Might you do that? Makes worldwide news? Might you have lots of earthquakes and things in various different places? And we're having those, tornadoes that blow around and tear people's houses up. I guess my point is what else could God do to get your attention than what he's already done? So if he's trying to get your attention, maybe it makes sense for you to give it to him. And I just want to encourage you to do that. John, did you have something?
Well, I just was thinking of the parallels. I mean, the virus was started by people eating food that is unclean.
Yep.
We're in lockdown, which sounds a lot like the Passover. After when you do the Passover, you're locked down.
Yep.
Or the angel of death will pass over you.
Yep.
There were some other ones. It's all occurring right now during the Passover.
Yep.
Passover
it's
season.
I think there's absolutely no accident that the stuff we're going through right now is occurring in Passover, just before Passover. And since we know that God does things according to his calendar, according to his appointments, his set-aside appointments, his special appointments, we ought to keep an eye out what's going on. I'm telling you, we ought to be looking for him, because he might show up in a very big way sometime before the season of Passover is over. And it starts just next week. I'm finished. I did good, 7 to 8:30. I love it when I'm on time. So let me pray. Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for your Torah. Thank you. I'd like to thank you for this group of people that came out to study it, but there's not too many. But I thank you for the ones that did. I just thank you for the hard times that we're going through. And I thank you that they're designed to make us draw closer to you, to study your word, to ask ourselves truly, what is it that we should be doing? Help us to clean up our accounts. Help us to take some of those habits and thoughts and things that are not holy or righteous, and to put them aside and just focus on you. And I ask that you just guide us in the path that we should go. We know that you have a path for each of us. It's different, but it's for each of us. Father God, I just ask that you work with the people that are interested enough and that are committed to you enough to actually study your Torah with an effort to do it. Thank you for the time, and I'd ask that you just watch over us as we go through the coming week. In Yeshua's name, amen. So,
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you to the people online. We had a fair amount. So
okay, thanks a lot. Good night.